And you know what, actually? I'm going to stop panicking about the fact that I remember nothing from the sheets that you've made me read.
You should stop panicking about
I'm
that.
not going to panic about it because by the time we're in week 8, we're going to know it by heart. And certainly by episode 20.
What do you know by heart? There's nothing to know
The
by
segments and the sections and all
Oh.
these segments. Like I have segment panic in my brain. Not segment panic. Segment stress.
Let's not do that.
Thank you.
Let's not segment stress. But also, you're going to wing it. That's our thing.
That is our thing.
You're going to wing it. I think people will want to listen to this because we're winging it.
Well, people will want to listen to this because it's our actual thoughts rather than us being scripted.
Yeah. And even when I'm just sitting like this, I'm like, should I put my feet down? Probably. Maybe.
Right? I actually sit like that in all meetings
Same.
because I feel like it's the most
Comfortable.
position. And actually, it's really good for you from a sitting cross-legged is actually quite a more
Good
natural position to be in. I mean, really, squatting is the best position to be in, but we're not going to get many people to adopt that.
Maybe we can talk about that in a future episode.
Maybe. That's what I think.
Welcome to Not Designed for the Grind, a period reality podcast about women's health, hormones, and the power of understanding your cycle.
I'm Dr. Katerina Bambang, consultant gynecologist and subspecialist in reproductive medicine, and also founder of the Delphi Clinic.
And I'm Marlou, social entrepreneur and TEDx speaker, and founder of Period Reality and Jibe. We bring together science and storytelling to change the way we understand women's health.
Every week, we'll have honest conversations, challenge outdated myths, and bring you fresh perspectives on women's health.
And we're in ovulation mode this week, where the energy is confident, expressive, and connected. Expect some big conversations and bold ideas. Let's begin. Here we are again.
Here we are.
Can't believe it's been a week.
I know.
It is such a good excuse, though, to see you regularly.
I know. I'm really enjoying that, actually. And in ovulation, when we're...
Peaking. So again, like, I think I'm not sure if we're going to be able to keep this up, that we're both on the same cycle.
How have we managed that, actually?
And
we're
that we've
actually-
matched it with the recordings.
And I've got quite a short cycle as well, so I don't know.
I've got quite... How long
Have
is your
you?
cycle?
23 days.
Oh, 24, 25.
Oh, wow. There
Interesting.
we go.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I mean, that could be either really good or like the menstrual phase episode could be like
Yeah.
It's
That's true. That's true.
Neither of us want to be here.
We don't want to
but
be here.
We're showing up regardless. But that's exciting though. That's good. At least for this time it works out.
Yeah, that's
with,
true.
Us spreading
which is
out the
good.
episodes as well.
That's
Yeah,
good.
it's good to see you again.
It's nice to see you.
How's this week been for you?
Do you know, it's been busy. It's been busy. And I think it's really hard, isn't it? Because you know all the things, but in terms of, giving yourself time and all the, make sure you give yourself time to do things. And sometimes it works.
All the things.
Do your self-care and make sure you pause to kind of move, and you know how much better it makes you feel. And sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't. And I have to say last week it probably didn't. So I think I felt more tired than I would have done by the end of the week. But again, it's a highlight to getting back to it.
And
getting back to the rhythm.
I think there's also external factors, right? Like some weeks are just
trickier. Yeah.
And
And you've got deadlines.
Big
to submit,
deadlines,
which
big
you've got.
milestones.
Yeah.
So I think that's, obviously we're
that's
never
very
going to
true.
be.
Yeah. How was your week?
We had a couple of big things going on this past week as well, which seeped into my weekend, which was all exciting, but just means I feel like I haven't had like a proper break. But I almost wore my orange t-shirt, today to this podcast.
Oh.
Because, have you seen my post?
No, I haven't.
Online? So I don't know how relevant this will be when this podcast
I
comes
have
out.
this alternate, but you tell me first.
Okay. Well, this has to do with the Olympics.
I knew you were going to say that.
Because yesterday was the big, it was 1,000-meter speed skating race for women, which is genuinely a really good race for Dutch women.
It is, because I was watching the 3,000 meters speed skating for women. So tell me about
Well, there
10,000.
the best thing about it, which I think is why it's relevant to bring up here, is there is this Dutch speed skater. Her name is Jutta Leerdam. Most people will know her because she's also in a relationship with Jake Paul. We can have lots of opinions about that. But
I don't know who he is.
Well, I was going to say we can put it in the show notes, but I honestly don't think we have to. I think when people hear this, they will genuinely think that you've been living under a rock, which is probably, in this case, probably
Fair.
for your best interest as well.
Oh, okay.
But him and his brother got famous because of YouTube films, and then they built this whole like empire around it. So they're very well known. Mostly through like online influencing, brand building, and then they've it's they're businessmen, like they've built a proper empire around it. All that, having said all of that, the cool thing about Jutta is that she was a phenomenal talent within speed skating anyway, and at some point she just decided that she wanted to build a brand around that and build a brand around herself.
Oh, okay.
So she actually leaned into the whole social media and becoming a bit of an influencer and sharing more of the behind the scenes online. And then in 2024, so about 2 years ago, she left all of the commercial teams in speed skating. So she basically went out on her own. With a coach, with like a super small team of 2 or 3 people who were there 24/7 to help her, all in the build up to this one particular race where she just wanted to win gold. She won silver 4 years ago. And lots of people had lots of different opinions about it, because especially in the Netherlands, there's a very, very much just be normal kind of culture, like stay humble, stay grounded.
Okay. Don't put your head above the parapet.
Exactly. Well, I think in the Netherlands it's called like the cornfield. Don't put your head. Well, anyway.
I love a geographical variation.
Difference in like metaphors. So she's faced a lot of backlash and pressure from people because she's just doing things differently.
Gosh, and I can imagine there must be a lot of pressure when there's a race involved. There's actually something where people, if it doesn't work out, they're waiting for you to fail. Yeah.
So then what happened yesterday is that another Dutch woman who was a candidate, her favorite distance is 500 meters, so slightly shorter, but she was a candidate for gold, and she just did what no one expected. Like, she raced the race of her life and she broke the Olympic records.
Wow.
But that was before Jutta had to go. So now imagine having all that pressure. You still have to skate that race of your life, and then someone else breaks that Olympic record, and then she still had to go. And she did it, and then she won.
Wow, that's given me goosebumps.
I know.
That's
it was
amazing.
Phenomenal. I still haven't brought that conversation back to why this is relevant to the podcast, but Jutta was actually the first speed skater, but definitely one of the first in elite sports to open up about periods and the menstrual cycle.
Really? What was
she's had races where she maybe wasn't performing like at her best, and she would say, well, I'm not surprised when I'm like, I was literally folded in half yesterday because I was cramping because my period was on, and she would make those statements in front of the media. So it's become a little bit of that thing that's now following her around. So every time when someone says something about how she's brave and courageous, they say, because remember, she was the first to open up about the menstrual cycle.
So is that a thing then? So it comes up
in her context. It's not like every athlete or every speed skater is now talking about it, but it's definitely part of her image in the Netherlands, where people see her and think how she was brave enough to have those and name it.
Yeah.
So the reason I asked it, did you see my post? Like, when I was reflecting on it, I thought it's the courage to being able to go out there and build your platform, but then also realizing that actually that platform then comes with an opportunity, if not responsibility,
completely,
to actually share important messages like that, and that you win not just despite your cycle, but that once you honor it and acknowledge it and recognize it, you can build it into
win because of your cycle.
Maybe like I would love. Maybe we should invite her on this podcast.
I think we should. No, honestly, I really think we should, and I love that because do you know what? It's funny. I've spent my I've wanted to be a gynecologist since I was 17. So periods, women, all of that has been in my life forever as the thing that I want to do. And it's so funny that even I, though, pause when it comes to talking about my period publicly. And it's always fascinated me, when I was younger, probably not so much now, but years ago, it would just be something that you do quietly. And so over the years, the more I've kind of been thinking about, cycles and being out there and kind of working with your cycle and all of the things that we talk about, I think, wow, how it's so pervasive across society that it's something we should keep to ourselves. So I love that, icons in sport can come out and make that a normal conversation that teenagers can look at and say, oh my word, she talked about cramps. I've got period cramps. I just think that's fantastic.
And especially if you look at the numbers of girls who drop out of sports in those very critical years, isn't it? Because whatever sports they do, but there's not the proper facilities or support or conversation to protect that love for sports. And not let that, because it's like, even from a mental health perspective, right? Like on top of the obviously physical health and why it's good for teenagers to do some kind of sports anyway. For your mental health as well, then to think that you would give that up because of shame or embarrassment or practical.
Or practical things that, actually, if it was an open conversation, it would be, right, well, what can we do? Let's get you to see someone.
Exactly.
I've had so many teenagers in clinic who are swimmers, actually. So a few swimmers who came with their parents, and the conversation was, she can't, she's not, she's got really painful periods or really heavy periods, and she can't swim, and she's swims sort of 3-4 times a week, and it was really affecting her mental health because that's what she loves. And I just think, oh my word, there's so much support we should be giving girls. It's amazing that they want to be out there, but instead, what are we saying? We're saying, oh dear, well, here we are.
Too bad.
That's what being a woman comes with. So stop the thing that you love. So I love that. I absolutely think we need to bring her on.
And now I wonder whether what phase of the cycle would she have been in yesterday?
Oh yeah, maybe we'll
find out.
Maybe we'll find out. I like
that. So here we are, because today we are talking about ovulation. We obviously mentioned it a little bit last week, and we did, didn't we? What's going on around ovulation?
In ovulation. So we mentioned how estrogen levels start to rise in the follicular phase, don't they? And so what happens is they peak just before ovulation. And actually, that peak is the trigger to ovulation. So if you think about it, and I'd love to kind of put a cycle image, an image of the actual cycle in our show notes, because that will make more sense. So you have this beautiful kind of cycle, and what happens is your estrogen starts to peak, and then it hits peak, and what that does is it triggers this response in your brain, which sets off the hormone that causes ovulation. So that's something called luteinizing hormone. And so that's released, and that's the signal for your follicle, your little sac containing the egg, to pop and release its egg. And so that whole process is what we call ovulation, essentially. And that then triggers all the things that are going to happen next, which we'll talk about in our next episode.
So, I mean, just again, to clarify some of the things that we talk a lot about in our communication, we often refer to the cycle as 4 different phases, right? Mm-hmm. I think even in a lot of images I see online, but I guess as a visual learner, my head instantly goes to like a pie chart with 4, not squares, but 4 parts, right? Yeah. 4 equal parts. Whereas that's not what's happening, right? No. Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that maybe your menstrual phase is about a week, maybe your follicular phase is about a week. That's very different around ovulation. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true, actually, because ovulation technically is a point in time, but essentially it's quite a tight interval, because you've got this peak. Then once you have the trigger for ovulation, which is what happens in your brain, you're going to ovulate within sort of 24 to 36 hours. And that's it, really. That's that ovulation phase as an event. It's almost like an event rather than a phase, in the same way as the other phases are sort of gradually building. This is a kind of trigger point, and almost everything else is building up to this point, because that's the critical point that's going to decide whether you're going to have a period or not in the next cycle. Because if that doesn't happen, then you're likely to have well, you may bleed, but it won't be a period in the way that you know it. So it decides whether the rest of your cycle is going to be as normal as it sort of normally runs. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is totally different.
And I think when we spoke a little bit about your period and the menstrual phase, I think we said specifically it's the only phase in the whole cycle where you can physically see that it's starting, right? So which is why we say day one is the first day of your bleed.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because the more in tune you are with your body, the more you're able to navigate these different transitions. But the first day of your bleed is day one because you can physically see it. Now, I know that there's ways to kind of pinpoint ovulation as well.
Ovulation. Do you get any of those?
So I don't feel them.
No?
I don't have any like physical symptoms. And I think for me, that might well be because I'm still on that journey of getting to know my body a little bit better. Like I'm so oblivious to what's happening in my body until it hits like a certain, even with pain, I don't necessarily register pain until I'm in a lot of pain.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think we may have spoke about that earlier of like, even with some signals, this is my ADHD as well, even with some signals about being thirsty or needing to go to the toilet, like I don't pick up on that until I really need to go to the toilet. And I think I'm hoping that it's still a journey that I'm on, that maybe one day I'm like, poop, that was my ovulation.
And you know what? Actually, that's so true. Because actually, sometimes some people have signals with ovulation that are really obvious. But then some people, it's really subtle, isn't it? So if you're someone who doesn't naturally pick up on really subtle things in all areas of your life, then there's a good chance you'd miss it. Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
But then one of the things that we do recommend to people who are new to cycle tracking, especially because roughly like a 28-day cycle or, whatever is normal for you, is a long time to not know where you are exactly when you're new to cycle tracking. So we often say that there's ways to obviously pinpoint ovulation, right? So things that we often recommend is either ovulation tests, which is often seen as a tool to help with family planning, but you can obviously use them whenever.
Yeah, completely. To be honest, I don't recommend them for family planning other than a couple of times, to be honest, because I think they're a great tool. But they can, particularly for women who are trying to get pregnant, I think they can become quite stressful. So you're absolutely right. I tend to suggest using them to help you learn what your body is like and then stopping. Because once you know, you don't need that signal anymore. So, maybe you test 2-3 cycles. And so you find out, say, if you happen to be one of these people who has a 28-day cycle, you can test. Great if you ovulate on day 14, which is bang in the middle of the cycle. A lot of women don't. You might ovulate on day 16 or 17. And what I say is then when you get your peak, just sort of take more time paying attention. And then once you've done that 2-3 times, you might notice something. You might notice a little bit of pain, just to kind of, or you might notice your discharge, or just a little bit of bloating, little things that you're like, oh, that seems to happen every day 16. And then you link that up with the test, and then you're like, oh, so it's just that realization. Once you've done that twice and it's been consistent both times, you can then park it. If your cycle's generally regular, you can say, right, I'm not doing that again. But then you know what to look out for.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's true for so many tools that are being suggested or offered in family planning, especially when you've been trying for a while, right? Like they're both incredibly helpful and equally stressful.
Yeah. No, honestly,
because it just becomes this focus point or almost.
But I think maybe not just family planning. Do you think it happens in a lot of things? Because we can track so much now, can't we? So there's that balance between tracking that's helpful and tracking that then becomes
obsessive.
Yeah, that's true. Do you like tracking?
Well, we've established last week that I'm obviously a basic tracker. So other than
cycle tracking, beyond cycle tracking.
I mean, and again, this might be just my personality as well. I like the idea of collecting that data. I'm not very good with the consistency and follow through of it. So I know that even in like sports, for example, and like when we're training for something, I ran 2 marathons in my life, which is a fun fact for those of you who, who don't know me that well yet, because I hate running. But even in the build up to that, I know, and my husband's very different. He would be like, he would have his heart rate, he would have his like fitness levels. He, you know, he's one of those who wake up in the morning and look at his watch when I ask him like, "How was your sleep?" And he's like, "Let me find out." And that used to annoy me so much because I'm like, when you wake up, you know what
How you
kind of
feel.
sleep you've had.
Well, not always though.
Not always, but then is the watch gonna do? And I guess that's why I said used to. So maybe the watch will tell you. But he is fascinated about the data, not just about getting it, but also analyzing it. And I think because
data.
that's not like, because the analyzing part is not my forte.
Forte, yeah.
Then the data itself also feels a bit
means
more pointless,
Yeah,
which is what we're
yeah.
trying to integrate with cycle tracking as well. Like, how do we make sure that whatever comes up for people as they start tracking their cycle means something
Yeah,
rather than just looking at a graph?
And do you know what, exactly? And I think that's such a good point that you've made there, because it's all about you as a person. So then you know that data isn't massively meaningful because you don't really like
Yeah.
tracking. So therefore, even in your cycle tracking, you're just going to say, well, actually, what I really want to know from my cycle is 1, 2, 3, or whatever thing you've set as your goal. So you don't need additional data about it. And that's fine. I'm the opposite. I love data. Oh my word. Give me a list of data. You know, my heart rate variability goes down in my luteal phase. I love it. And I just find it really fascinating, just really interesting. So I like to kind of keep an eye
Well,
on
that's
what
you're
these
my
things
friend
do.
who I call for those kind of things. That's why I think this works.
Just tell me a little bit of background on this.
Yeah.
No, I love it. So so for me, it's really nice, but it's more because I am a bit of a data geek.
Yeah, no, that's
So
great. Because I think one of the other things that we suggest when people want to pinpoint where they are in their cycle, especially around ovulation, is your basal body temperature. Now, that's obviously a little bit more frickly. Is that a word? Prickly? More fumble?
more, yes, I know what you mean. Oh, what's the word? Now it's gone.
But I think people will know
Fickle.
what it fickle. It's a little bit more fickle because my understanding of it, and you're going to tell me how best to do this if people were interested in this, is that you measure your body temperature
Yeah,
at the same time every day,
every day.
and you'll see that just before ovulation, that temperature will drop a little bit. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because
Yeah,
especially
yes.
talking about collecting data, that's one where you have to
Yeah,
be
so
super
that's one.
consistent,
So
isn't it?
you would have to be super consistent. So generally, I would probably test temperature. Actually, that's a good point. I'm not entirely sure. Either morning or night, but really consistently about the timing of testing. And so what you'll expect is a little dip and then a rise in the luteal phase, and a little dip in ovulation. The problem with it is it can be quite inconsistent. And I think that's another one that can create anxiety in terms of, oh gosh, my body temperature didn't follow. But there's so many other factors that
Yeah.
can influence your body temperature. It's really hard to be confident that it was because of your
Yeah.
cycle. So again, I would probably marry it up with something. I would tag it to something. I probably wouldn't track that on its own if I was interested in tracking.
But what I really liked about that one is that there's obviously smartwatches available now that
Yeah, they'll
want to
tell you your
support
temperature. Yeah,
tracking.
yeah, that's true.
And you've got ones who can track.
and rings that can do the same.
So they kind of do it on your behalf. And I've never done it because I wanted to know specifically. So that tool gave me enough information for me to be satisfied
For
with
you to
when,
know,
it
yeah.
might be your ovulation. That was fine. But I thought that was,
And actually, yeah, the other thing that they do quite nicely now is that they marry up that data with other things. So I mentioned heart rate variability. They'll marry up sort of temperature, heart rate variability, and all those changes, and kind of give you more detailed insights. So actually, compared to the way it used to be done, where you had to measure it, if you are using something that an actual app or tool that's or wearable even is what I meant, That's probably quite useful because it then does it for you
Yeah.
automatically. So it kind of removes that bias a little bit of you kind of trialing it out
Yeah.
yourself. So, but you're not a wearable lover, are you?
Um, I feel like the conversation goes back to my ADHD a lot to this conversation.
No, but it's
I
important.
used to have one.
Yeah.
And then at
But
some
you
point
never
it
read
needs
it.
charging when I lost my charger. And then that's just the end of it,
That
isn't
was
it? So
that.
I haven't worn it in a long time, but I should. But I think it's going back to that same thing of, it's wanting the latest technology, but then not optimizing it
Not,
because
yeah.
you're not using it properly. And I feel like
Yeah.
that was me with the
Yeah.
smartwatch. It's like I'm using it like I would probably use any other watch because I don't want the notifications on it all the time anyway. And then
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
properly using the data
The
that it's
data
giving me.
that
But
you're
like I
getting.
said, I think the basic cycle tracking stuff that it did for me. So just when does your cycle start? How long does your cycle last? When does it think that you're ovulating? Those were
Those were
very
helpful.
helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
And
that's
to be fair, when I started wearing it was around the time where I started my cycle
thinking
tracking
about.
journey.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was helpful.
It is helpful. No, I think it can be. And I always, and because ovulation's such a thing for me, I like to know. So having that, that's probably I know I've said before, I'm quite basic in my tracking in terms of what I document, but I do like to know, oh, this time
It's
is
coming.
coming up. So talk to me about ovulation actually. What are
Yes.
you, because when I think about you, I'm always curious. This is good because actually I get to find out
Yeah.
what happens.
Uh-oh.
Because I look at you and you're always, you have so many, you wear so many different hats, particularly, work wise in business, so many different hats that you're kind of putting on and putting off really quite rapidly with rapid changes. And so I always wonder, how does that show up for you in ovulation, or does ovulation help you with those hats?
That's interesting.
Or vice versa, do the hats make it trickier when you're ovulating?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think genuinely the whole having diversity in my day and working on different things has been, I think it's something that I've always sought out in my work anyway. I think as soon as I started my grown-up professional working life, I've always luckily had roles where that was possible. So that just worked really well. There's definitely days where that comes easier to me than other days, though. And I find maybe there's two ways to answer that question. I think in terms of whether it influences how I show up
Show
wearing
up.
those different hats, I think it's definitely easier around a time where I feel more energetic and more confident. And, I think there's maybe more not so in the opposite time, so I don't know how much of that is heightened because of ovulation or how much of that is kind of lowered because I'm heading into my menstrual phase and I'm a little bit more retracted and a little bit more introverted. What I find though is that my inner critical voice, like my maybe imposter syndrome or my is a lot louder when I'm heading into my period and when I'm on my period. So that voice of
Okay.
you're doing too many things at the same time. Can't you remember that person always said, if you don't focus on that,
You're
if you
not
don't
going to
focus
achieve
on
this.
one
And
thing, you don't focus on anything. If
yeah,
those voices are a lot louder, and then I think, oh my God, am I doing too much? Am I
yeah.
being overly ambitious? Am I not? Whereas then coming out of my menstrual phase and especially heading into ovulation, I'm like, no, this is exactly what I should be doing.
Yeah,
This is my superpower. It
yeah.
would be such a shame and a waste of all the ideas that are coming up in my head to not be
To not do
executed and
them.
not throw them out in the
Yeah.
world. And I would rather, get 10 things out in the world and for 9 of them to fail than
But
to
not to
go to
get
bed with
anything.
all 10 of
Yeah,
them
with all
still
10
in
of
my
them in your
head.
head.
So I think it's mostly my self-belief and confidence that there's just a lot less noise around that ovulation time.
Well, that's
And
interesting.
I quite like because you called it like the estrogen, like the superpower, the super
Yeah, the
hormone
super
last
hormone.
time. And we hear that a lot actually in people's experience of it's that one dress, maybe that dress that makes you feel very confident and sexy, and wearing it around your period, it just might not do what you want
Yeah,
it to do.
yeah.
Whereas putting it on when you're ovulating, you get it.
You
It's
get
like,
it.
this is
Yeah,
why it's my
yeah.
favorite
This
dress
is
and I want to
why.
wear
Yeah.
it. Interestingly enough,
I like that
someone's
analogy. That's a really good analogy.
about the favorite dress.
Yeah.
Well, and someone sent me an article the other day, which I thought was fascinating. It might not have been an article, maybe more like a post, but there was research done, and it might not have been scientific, but I'll share it anyway, about how strippers make a lot more money during their ovulation phase compared to when they're on their
Really?
period.
That's so interesting.
So, what is that? Is that their
Yeah, that's
confidence and like
fascinating.
what
I
they're
reckon it's related to their
portraying?
confidence. So I think research in cycle tracking is actually really difficult. And there's a lot of data, there's data that says, oh, cycle tracking makes no difference. Women actually, when you study them across the board in various areas, they've noticed no difference when tracked over a long period of time. So if you track over a year, actually, there's no difference from baseline.
Difference in what?
Difference in how they show up in how they in how they perform. But then there are some studies, sort of shorter studies, that will say, well, actually, there's an increase in women will generally report an increase in confidence when they're ovulating. What I think is really interesting about research, or relying on research, and having evidence is really important on the one side, but then it's also knowing what the limitations of evidence are. Because actually, when you're using a lot of women to report on something that's really highly personal and also has a lot of reflections, has a bi-directional relationship. The way I feel about my periods also reflects on what my experience of my periods are. And so it's really hard to create data and evidence in a very strict research sense in the way that we study things at the moment. I would almost say this should be in qualitative research, almost in social sciences rather than in biological sciences where it sits, because it does have the narrative of the person is super important in that experience. So this is the one situation. I mean, there's a few situations, I think, in medicine where n=1 is actually really important.
Yeah.
And what I mean by n=1 is when you think about a study and how many people they're using in that study, that's your number. So n=10,000 people 10,000 women were used in this study, but actually n=1 is you and your experience.
Yeah.
And I think in this situation, sort of things like cycle tracking, that's really valuable. And it's about just being really careful about saying, well, no, there's no evidence that, this makes any difference. But actually, when you're experiencing something really kind of bi-directional, you should listen to it.
And like I think I like what you said as well around it's hard to measure something within existing context, right? We talked last week about like your normal is your mom's normal, is your grandmother's normal, right? And you carry that with you since birth, that narrative. And then we operate in a society that has an expectation on us that we've also been carrying with us our whole lives. So
but whose context has changed,
exactly.
Right? Because your normal is the normal that your mom passed on to you, which is the normal your grandmother passed on to her. Their norms, their societal context was totally
Also
different to yours. And so you're marrying those two up now and trying to make sense of the context you were given with the context you're living in. So even that is complicated.
We said the other day, we had a meeting around impact measurement, and we can talk about that at a different time in more depth because that was fascinating in itself. But we were saying actually what we're trying to measure here is also how many people are aware of this and that your cycle is more than just a period and that different things are happening in your body at different points and how it may affect you or how it may not affect you. And by the time people have found us, even if people have never heard of this and they're listening to this podcast, by the time we have a chance to talk to people about the impact, that's not a baseline. So what we hear a lot when I talk to people about this, one of the most common responses is first an apology. I think we spoke about that before as well. Like, I'm so sorry. I never heard this before. I'm sorry. I've never been taught this, or, this is totally new for me. And I wonder that in itself is really hard to capture. Like, if it's such a new concept for so many people and women, that by the time they've interacted with us or they've seen our website or they've been to our training or they've listened to the podcast, they've already had their introduction. So and that was some food for thought for us.
Yeah.
Of like, how would you even measure this in a population to know how many people are aware of this?
How many people are aware and how many people aren't? Yeah, completely. That's so true. And actually, that's a really good point. Now that I think about it, actually, if you're thinking about it in research terms as well, you're actually potentially starting with a group of women who are at differential points, aren't they, and of their journey of awareness. So therefore, how do you know that you're even tracking the same thing? Or, because if you have I don't know, you're studying 100 women and 20 of those women are super aware, they've always known about their menstrual phases and all those things. But then you've got 50 women who had no idea, and actually enrolling in this study was the first time they found out about cycle phases. Then the outcomes are going to be totally
Very
different. Yeah, so those 20 women are not the same as the 50 women.
Especially because it's not something you know or don't know.
Yeah.
It is that journey of getting to know your body, integrating it into your lifestyle.
Absolutely. So, so the starting point matters. That's such a good point.
Coming back to that, we talked about the period reality rule, which is the only thing that is true is what is true for you, which I think is what we were just saying about this research anyway. That is very true for how people experience these different phases as well. And I think in the last episode, you ended off by saying, I know we said this power hormone and being great on our ovulation. That shows up slightly different for you.
It does show up differently for me. I'm confident. I wouldn't say it's probably my peak confident time. I'm actually more confident in my luteal phase, I would say. My early luteal phase. When I ovulate, I know it's coming because I get more impatient, more irritable. I want things to just happen. I want things to just be organized. I want them to happen on time, no delays.
Which for those of us, well, not those of us listening who don't know you, that's very unusual.
It's quite unusual, isn't it? I mean,
it's normally we'll wing it. What's the deadline, and then, but what's the real deadline?
But yeah, no, I do, and I'm more. I can feel that I'm more irritable and just want things to just get done. So, so I know ovulation is coming, and actually the worst day is probably the day after I've ovulated, or the day after I've peaked, or I can feel ovulation is happening, because I actually get pain, so I always know spot on when I'm going to ovulate and which side I'm ovulating from. So so I always kind of give my husband a heads up. I'm like,
coming.
Tomorrow might not be such a good day. So that's it. And it's funny because I didn't used to know. I always used to think something else was happening because I was always really busy, so I didn't really pay attention. But now I know it's definitely, I always linked it to something work related. External. Whereas now I know, no, it doesn't actually matter because those things also happen at other times, but you don't react in this same way. Yeah. But when they happen in this time, you always seem to have the same reaction. So now I know. So I have to just remind myself, like yesterday was that day because I ovulated a couple of days ago. And so yesterday was that day. And then I had to just say to myself, right, take a minute and just take a bit of time out because...
Which is that in itself is so powerful, isn't it? And that's what we often refer to as well. When you just said NS1, is that biggest transformation happens on an individual level
completely.
Because, this would have not been picked up because so many people report to feel like, ovulation is like your, the best time of the month.
Great, yeah.
Whereas that is as true as everyone else's experience because it's your experience.
It's my experience.
It's your reality.
Yeah. And actually, do you know, it's so liberating because I could then say to myself, now I don't have to take everything really personally. Like if I fall out with my husband on the day after I ovulate, I don't have to take it so personally and think, oh my word, I can't believe he doesn't understand me and I'm trying to express myself. I can just go away and say, do you know what, actually, just really break that down. Was that really misunderstanding, or was it that you're just impatient today and a lot of the time it is because I'm impatient because there are conversations we've had before in different phases and they didn't bother me, so why do they bother me today? So with that in mind, I can just be a bit more relaxed and just kinder to myself, actually. Just step away from the conversation. Have it again tomorrow. When you're in a better place, and it's true. And today I'm much better. So I know for the next 3 days, I will be...
Are there things that you would intentionally plan or not plan around that time?
Oh, that's a good point. No, I haven't become that intentional. I suppose that's trickier to coordinate if you're working in an environment where
I
there's
mean,
external deadlines, but that's a good
it
point.
could be date night as well.
Yeah, that's true. We're not having date night at ovulation.
Okay. I thought you were going to...
It will end badly. End in an argument.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But it's a great example of how these individual experiences are so different. And I think that's why, even when we talk to businesses and organizations and teams, the focus is so much of creating space where people can actually use their own intelligence to put that into practice. Because we all know that you can't mold the world around you and your cycle. Fine. I think no one is suggesting, I don't often see that, that is that people are suggesting that once you know this stuff, you need to be able to design your whole life around it. But it's that still being able to do what is expected of you, but being kinder towards yourself, take a deep breath. Like you said, you have a bit of distance. But I was talking to a friend the other day and she runs like a sales team. And I said, it would be so fascinating to just not like, obviously to come in and do a training and stuff like that, but even do a bit of like a baseline training, a
baseline
survey assessment.
Yeah.
And to kind of see, do people actually sell more when they're around their phase, and that might not have to be across the board, but in general. And because then I think the point I was going to try and make here was that the suggestion to the company that wouldn't be make sure that's where they do the most of their sales or whatever, like the most external facing thing, but about giving people the option to manage their own calendar.
To manage their calendar.
Because for you, that heavy sales week, if you had that flexibility within your calendar, would follow your early luteal phase rather than the build up to your ovulation phase. And that, that could be actually really good business.
Really good. So do you think, when you think about kind of the work that you do out with businesses in terms of awareness or building awareness, do you think there's specific tools that businesses can adopt? So flexibility in individual calendar building. And actually, that's something people want more and more anyway, isn't it? So actually, this is more evidence that it works. Like productivity would probably go up. Are there any other tools that you think would work really well for a lot of businesses, sort of thinking about smaller or bigger businesses?
100%. I mean, we could... I'm hoping that we're going to devote a whole episode on this because there's lots of ideas. But I think what we are trying to do is there's a baseline bit that kind of applies across the board, right? And awareness is a huge part of that. And then building on that awareness of actually influencing the culture so that people can actually have these conversations. I've spoken to so many male managers who would love to have these conversations but don't know where to start.
Don't know how to raise them,
it's like I can't go up to my employee and say, what day of the cycle are you on? Especially if we've never talked about that before. So it's helping have those conversations, introducing the topic on the work floor. In terms of practical things, it really depends of, again, like the baseline and the starting point of the company, because I would say the baseline is very often making sure that people feel seen and supported, and that can be through making products available for free, having hot water bottles in the office, making sure room temperature can be adjusted, having enough water access points so people can take pain medication. Obviously, remote working, flexible working, allowing for people to do that is huge. But it's so industry, from there on, it becomes so industry specific.
And I suppose that whole bit about the conversation, if it's built into their policies, that people can go to, something that says within having a sort of menstrual health policy that then also says, we're going to have these, we as an organization like to have these conversations really openly. So you may be asked and, feel free to say, I don't want to talk about it, or I'd rather not discuss it. But, you're welcome to raise it if you want to. And that's, that's so interesting.
And the cool thing about this is that it doesn't work if the company does everything right and the person doesn't invest in tracking.
Engage,
and vice versa. So it is a partnership, and that's where I think where it should start from as well. And we've been doing some incredible work with a factory. So there's women who stand in line from potentially 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with set toilet breaks. So the focus of the work that we bring is a lot less around flexible working, because there's no way to do that. But it's much more about
flexible toilet breaks.
Well, but even if possible,
If
yes.
possible.
But even more on that personal responsibility of saying, if you then have a break, don't force yourself to sit within the staff room, but actually take yourself out for a break when you're in your period or when that's coming and you know that you're easily overstimulated or whatnot. Socially, in that week, don't plan your evenings, with lots of social activities. Actually, take it easy that week because showing up at work is already taking so much from you.
Yeah.
That actually it's
completely.
important to make sure you balance that out in your free time.
Yeah.
Whereas in that week that you're ovulating,
Do
go
what you
all
need
out.
to do. And what you were saying was about, being kind to themselves and considering what they do at home in relation to what they do at work, in terms of if it's a role that doesn't have that much flexibility. The other thing I would say is, I suppose it's also being able to advocate for themselves, because if the factory is then aware, it's also being able to advocate for themselves if they don't have a bog standard cycle and they have a cycle that's complicated by pain or is irregular or is heavy, to create a sort of bespoke personal sort of plan for how they work, which isn't flexible necessarily, but says, look, because my period is irregular and heavy, is there a way that I can flex how frequently I have toilet breaks at specific times, of the month?
Or if let's talk about what our uniform looks like.
Or exactly, because actually that fear that could come with that, and I've experienced that personally, where you're sort of all of a sudden you're at work and all of a sudden you think, oh my God, this is bad, and it happens to so many women out there, and we're having sort of menstrual friendly workplaces is huge, isn't it?
And I think it's when businesses start to be curious about this, I think they often feel like, because we talk so much about systems change, it's like, oh, it's going to cost me a lot of money. I need to do everything different. Whereas these simple examples that we've just mentioned don't even have to cost a thing.
Absolutely.
So, and I think I'm quite proud of that partnership with that factory as an example, because I think they're demonstrating that if they can add value within these circumstances, then they're sending a very powerful message to any other business of like, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. You have to do this. So
that's really exciting.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's exciting.
Yeah, this is good. I think ovulation's brought up a lot of things to think about.
I know.
Yeah. Is it time for a lifestyle tip of the day?
No, but close. It's time for a weekly segment. You tried so hard.
Look at me. I thought
you tried so hard. Welcome to Hormone Horoscope, the only forecast powered by science and snacks. Hormone Horoscope. That sounds...
Horoscope.
I mean, I'm talking to a doctor here. That sounds incredibly fluffy to me. Why did we land on this segment?
Hormone horoscope. Well, it does sound a bit fluffy, but it's going to be a scientific horoscope.
Love that. What is the forecast for this week? What can people expect? They've hit ovulation. Rule of thumb. Shouting out the reality rule. The only thing that's true is what is true for you. So
yes, the reality rule.
Like with any horoscope, it won't apply to all. But what can people expect in their week of ovulation?
Week of ovulation, you can expect to feel more confident, more energetic, feel a bit more articulate. So, if you're wanting to have if you have those meetings, that you have some flexibility in when you set them, maybe now's the time to set them.
That is actually a big one for me as a bilingual person who speaks Dutch and English.
Oh, really?
Like the way I speak English and the words that come to mind and stuff like that, I feel definitely I'm fumbling a little bit more.
Really?
And no one else would pick up on that, but I
so
do.
Interesting. Yeah. And I do feel a bit of a fraud saying it when I've just had a conversation about how ovulation is not my peak time. But in general, a lot of women report that they feel sort of super confident around
Do you see that? Do you see a link between... We obviously talk about cycle tracking and knowing and understanding your own body also as a tool to advocate for your own health, right? And being able to ask the right questions. And I can imagine that confidence shows up in the room as well when you sit there with your doctor. And like, do you see...
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess it's different for each individual and what their experience is. But I can't say... I think it's tricky because I often see women when they're having difficulty with their cycles. So I wouldn't say it shows up per se in that way, because they're either going to see me because their cycle isn't working for them, or because they're trying to conceive, so there's other things that are kind of complicating how they're showing up in that time. So I can't say that I've seen that. But what I would say is that if that is the time, following tracking, that you're feeling confident and at peak, maybe that's the time to book your appointments. And I say this with full awareness that getting a doctor's appointment can sometimes
Be tricky enough.
really tricky. So,
But it's good to, even if it's not at a time where you feel confident, it's helpful to know that even though I might not feel my most confident self,
yeah,
I'm
And
gonna I'm gonna acknowledge that before I walk into that room and still
absolutely,
channel
and
that
still
energy.
channel that energy. And I think the one thing I would always say is, do advocate for yourself. Just remember that you know your body, and your job isn't to justify your body or explain to your healthcare provider that they need to listen to you. Your job is to know your body and just say, look, this is my experience. Talk to me. What do we need to do?
This is where you're bringing the data element again, right?
Yeah, because
Bring as much data as you can.
yeah, bring data, bring yourself, because my job is to listen to you and hear you for what your experience is. And I think we've reversed it a lot, and that's what I'd love women to go back to, trusting their own bodies, because we've kind of got to this stage where, you'll go to the doctor sometimes and you'll say, oh, I don't know, you'll describe something and the doctor will say, well, no, but there's no research to support that. And you're like, oh, okay, sorry. And then you end up apologizing for things that are happening to you. But, that doesn't, that's quite invalidating. And to me, it's, well, the research we have doesn't say anything about that. But talk to me. Tell me more about what's happening. Because actually, if this is your experience, it's obviously your experience. We need to discuss how we make that better. So I really, really believe strongly women need to kind of own their cycle, own their body, and just trust in themselves that they do know their bodies better than anybody else.
So as a forecast for this week, we're going to channel
that energy.
our most confident self.
Yes, exactly.
Put on your favorite dress or trousers or suit or
Get
whatever
out
you
there.
like to wear.
Grab the mic.
Do
the talk.
Let your voice be heard.
That's it. Absolutely. And it wasn't the lifestyle tip of the day, but surely now is the lifestyle tip of the day.
Lifestyle tip of the week.
Oh, weeky.
Lifestyle tip of the week. Take it away.
Lifestyle tip of the week. So one of the things, I think, did we mention it earlier? A bit of discharge can happen during ovulation.
You haven't mentioned that yet.
Yeah, so you can get your more discharge around ovulation. So it can be sort of clear to creamy. I always say carry a panty liner with you when you know you're coming up to that time, so you don't get caught unprepared. So yeah, any thoughts from you?
Well, I've got a lifestyle tip of the week as well, but I was thinking about what you were saying about the discharge, which I think there's obviously a reason why that's there as well, right? So do we want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's related to fertility again. So that's when your cervical mucus changes. So the cervix is the neck of the womb. And so your discharge is coming from that area. So it changes in terms of being more sperm friendly, if you like. So that actually normally it's thicker. So there's a kind of plug, if you like, to the neck of the womb. So this is the neck of the womb relaxes a little bit. You've got more discharge from the glands there, preparing for fertilization. Well, not fertilization, but certainly intercourse leading to fertilization. Because and it's so funny talking about fertility, because within just everyday cycles, because actually that's the cycle's designed for that, isn't it? But it's so much more than that. So it's always really hard bringing it back to its base of actually what is it designed to do from an ontological perspective. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and not making it all that it's about.
All that it's about, exactly.
Right. I appreciate that, because I think when we talk about the different ways to pinpoint ovulation. And we spoke about obviously ovulation test, the basal body temperature. I think cervical mucus discharge is a way where a lot of people know, this is that time of the month. My lifestyle tip of the week would be maybe just ask that question. I think whether that's in a room full of people you don't know something, or whether it's to your doctor, or whether it's just ask again, channel that confidence and ask the question. Maybe it's even about asking that. I like this. Maybe it's even about asking that question of something that you want, and like throwing it out there and approaching people, or send that wild email to that person where you're like, maybe we're going to send Yuta Dom a message and just ask her to be on this podcast. This is the vibe. We're going to just ask the question.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a wrap on episode 3.
That is a wrap.
Can you believe it? That was great. I feel like I say that every week. That was great.
That was great, though.
That was great. Thank you for joining us for Not Designed for the Grind. We love sharing this space with you.
If today's episode resonated, subscribe and share it with someone who would value a deeper dive into her cycle.
You'll find show notes and further resources at periodreality.org.
And when confidence feels natural, use it. Advocate, present, negotiate. This phase is all about visibility. Remember, understanding your cycle isn't optional knowledge. It's the key to leading your best life.
Until next time. If you would like to reach out to the Not Designed for the Grind team or want to tell us your story, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at podcast@periodreality.org or follow us on Instagram at periodrealityofficial. You can also connect with us directly on Instagram at the.delphi.clinic and at Marlou Cornelissen, or find us on LinkedIn under Dr. Katerina Bambang and Marlou Cornelissen. If you'd like more resources, show notes and updates, visit periodreality.org/podcast. If someone came to mind while you were listening, send them this episode. And if you believe in what we're building, the simplest way to support us is to follow the show on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Ratings and reviews really do help more people find us, and 5-star reviews go a long way. A big thank you to all of you listeners, and please remember, the only thing that is true is what is true for you. Not Designed for the Grind is a podcast by Period Reality. The show is produced by Isabella Lindahl, created and hosted by Dr. Katerina Bambang and myself, Marlou Cornelissen. Audio editing and mixing by Delilah Odima, and our visual branding is developed by Millie Mensa. A special thank you to Favor Asweleman and the incredible team at Period Reality. We'll see you next time.